Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we discuss the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion, and joining me on the panel is Chief Ken Kehmna. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to take a moment and acknowledge the recent wildfires that have hit Southern California and are currently impacting thousands. A number of our colleagues, brothers, and sisters are out there doing what they can to help, and we didn't want to start today's discussion without sending our thoughts and prayers to those impacted by this disaster.
Thank you, Samantha. I really appreciate you saying something about that. I think it's obviously it's top of mind for all of us. Many of us have colleagues that are still working and actively deployed to the fires, and lots of friends and family that live in that area. It seems to be interesting how these things have so much reach. It doesn't matter how far you are away from these things, it's pretty easy to connect yourself to these kinds of things. So thank you very much for mentioning it. I really appreciate it. And I share your feelings about our hearts and prayers and really wanting to support those that are being impacted. So thank you.
Our topic today is fire fleet leasing. An article recently shared in the Daily Dispatch highlights the story of the Amarillo Fire Department, who has faced fleet challenges and is now proposing to lease fire trucks instead of purchasing them, aiming to improve reliability and reduce long-term costs. Ken, what are some of your thoughts on this proposal?
First of all, I would absolutely agree. We need to be creative with the resources that we're provided to be able to provide service to our respective communities, and it can vary widely. Some communities have far better resources, financial resources than others, and it's challenging. Equipment, apparatus, personnel, all of it continues to get more and more expensive every day. So I applaud any leader that is looking to these kinds of options to be creative with their financing and to stretch their dollars as far as they possibly can to really to benefit the community. I also have some experience in doing this very thing. We did it in my own department. So
Can you explain what some of the reasons for your own fire department doing the fleet leasing was?
yeah, so in a department the size of ours, and we were at the time we were 17 stations. That's it's at least it's at least a piece of equipment, if not multiple pieces of equipment in every station. Replacing that equipment is challenging. It takes a long time to replace equipment, whether you're buying something off the shelf, which is hardly even a thing, to be honest with you, or you're speccing something brand new. The lead up time to get an actual engine built or piece of equipment built and delivered to the station takes quite some time. But they get more and more expensive every day. And a lot of things impact the construction of that equipment, the ability to get resources, whether it's steel or aluminum or engines. We purchased the actual engine, the power plant, a year before we even started buying the engines, because the power plants were not going to be available. So we bought them on crates and had them sitting there so that when we built our apparatus, we would have them. So you have to be very creative with some of these things. And simply put, as they continue to get more expensive along with everything else, they compete for resources. They compete for the money that you have to spend on other equipment, personnel, stations and maintenance and everything. These very expensive operations. So we made the decision, because we had to replace a number of apparatus in our fleet simultaneously. We wanted to take advantage of a spec that was already out there, that we wanted to piggyback on a spec. It was LA County, I believe, at the time. They were purchasing a significant amount of fire apparatus, and we were going to piggyback on that. And the money that we were setting aside for the replacement of apparatus, we hadn't reached the amount that we would need to buy all those engines. So it was the most creative way we could come up with to acquire all of them simultaneously. And I think we bought five, if I remember. The number that sticks in my head is five. And these days engines go for $1 million. So finding $5 million just sitting around can be pretty challenging. That's why we did it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And when you were talking about the difficulties with, getting some of the parts or some of these engines, rigs, equipment, I can only imagine that the pandemic probably really took a toll on this fire department, and I'm sure they're not the only one either. Do you have any insights on other fire departments that were impacted the same way?
Kat, I would say across the board, we were all impacted. And you're right, the pandemic was one that really pulled the rug out from underneath a lot of us because the lead time on everything, our ability to source any of those things got even longer. And unfortunately, the line continues to grow because when you need to replace fire apparatus, you need to replace fire apparatus. We do a really good job of maintaining the equipment and get a lot of life out of the equipment that we do purchase. But in certain circumstances, they get used. And you need to replace them, not only because they physically wear out, but you need to take advantage of technology, safety technology. Just the other day, I saw a video of an apparatus being hit while sitting on the side of a road, snowy conditions, and an apparatus was parked, and it got hit by a truck that was sliding sideways. The safety features that are incorporated into modern equipment now is vastly different, just like cars, than it was many years ago. And so you want to maintain the best fleet, the most the newest fleet that you possibly can afford to take advantage of those things.
Oh, absolutely. In addition to fleet leasing, what are some other alternatives that you have seen or maybe even considered to address issues had in the past with having a full fire fleet?
Well, doing cooperative purchase, taking advantage of cooperative purchasing anytime you can do something like that is certainly to our benefit. And cooperative purchasing makes good sense for a lot of reasons. One, it gives us the ability to take advantage of publicly made available contracts for apparatus, to take advantage of a spec that may already be well refined, so it takes a lot less effort to get a piece of apparatus out the door because you're working with a good boilerplate, and you get pricing. You get better pricing. We all struggle, to maintain enough resources to replace apparatus. I mean, fire engines are $1 million, and fire trucks are even more. And so setting aside the funds to be able to do that can be pretty significant. If you're paying full retail and you're not taking advantage of something like cooperative purchasing or purchasing in large batches along with your neighboring agencies, you're missing out on an opportunity. One thing that I thought was really creative, and it was done by two agencies in the county that I came from, Santa Clara County. Two agencies shared responsibility for a truck company right on the border, and it was actually shared, the cost of the apparatus, the cost of the personnel, the response area. And I thought it was a very creative way to address the issue. They needed truck service. They needed to have a fire truck. Um, and neither one could really afford it or wanted to pay full boat to have a standalone, and they didn't want to have two. That would have been, comically expensive when they could share. So, it created partnerships, good relationships with our neighbors, and doing those kinds of things make a big difference. And I think anytime we can think outside of the box and creative and work with our partners, whether it's for, fire apparatus, personnel, communications equipment, right on down the line, we're better stewards of the resources that we've been granted by the community to serve them. And we're doing good work for the community by being responsible.
And I love that you brought up local partnerships and shared resources. I mean, that can benefit even the largest, the smallest. I feel like that can benefit everybody across the board, to be honest. So thank you for bringing that topic up. Can you think of any reason why someone might be against leasing, specifically leasing, not the shared resources, but just leasing?
It's going to cost you more money. I mean, in the long run, it's going to cost you a little more money. I mean, you save on the capital outlay at the beginning, but for the privilege of leasing, much like renting or anything else, you're paying a little bit more because you're not just buying it outright. So you're spreading that cost out over time, and you're paying a little bit because if you're financing the equipment, you're paying interest. If you're leasing it, you're not actually, you didn't buy it at the time, so you're sort of leasing it over time. So it could be slightly more expensive in the long run. If you have the ability to set aside funds into either a sinking fund or some other capital expenditure fund so that you have the funds available when you want to purchase, um, your ability just to pay right out of right out of the gate. Sometimes you get better prices from the manufacturer. So there can be a little bit of that. And to be honest with you, I think it's again it's much like we do with our own personal vehicles. I mean, we're used to buying versus leasing. Some people, all they ever do is lease vehicles because they always want to have something reasonably new and they don't want to have the headache of having to, have an old vehicle and have to replace it or sell it. And all those same feelings come in specifically, with apparatus as well. So sort of the same pushbacks.
Can you speak to us a little bit more about some of the operational challenges of managing a fleet, especially when vehicles are out of service for repairs or maintenance?
I fleet maintenance. I'm just going to say it right now. Hats off to the people who manage and maintain the fire service fleets that are hats off. Hats off. The complexity of what they do, I think, often gets missed. And I think a lot of people go through this. They're like, you take your car to the mechanic. How hard can it be? Go ahead and fix it. Wow, it's super expensive. Yeah, that's it. Our apparatus, our vehicles that we drive every day, but our fire apparatus are incredibly complex pieces of equipment. Whether it's the new computer systems that go into the apparatus and the pump panels and all the other stuff, they're gigantic. They're all of the equipment that you need to work on them is larger. It's specialized. It takes additional training to be able to work on fire apparatus and be certified to work on fire apparatus because unlike just a standard vehicle, fire apparatus come with a number of things on them that make it infinitely more complex. The water delivery system, the pump, the transmissions are more complicated, on the apparatus. Our truck companies, the physical principles involved with an elevated water stream or ladder, they're built very special to be able to accommodate the demands that we put on them. Subsequent to that, the people who work on that equipment have to understand all of that. And when apparatus is down for any length of time, we move into reserve apparatus, and reserve apparatus can vary widely in terms of how good it is. Oftentimes, it's just a frontline apparatus that was moved to reserve status because it was either too many miles or was too old to run frontline status. Great rigs, but they're not frontline. They're not your regular day-to-day apparatus. And so it's a significant issue. The other thing too, and this is a great time to talk about it, with the fires going on in Southern California, we're going to deploy resources. California has deployed resources to Southern California from all over the state to help provide additional resources to fight those fires. When those rigs roll out and they roll to provide mutual aid in other places in the state, we have to backfill with equipment. So maintaining a standing fleet, so you have rigs to run calls every day, plus to be able to backfill when you deploy resources to another area, takes a significant amount of work. We actually made the decision in my agency to offload the maintenance of our passenger vehicles, our command, the car that the fire chief drove, my vehicle. There was no reason for them to be working on that in the shop by the fire mechanics. They needed to work on fire apparatus. We could send, the Expedition, the Explorer, whatever it was I was driving to a regular dealership because there was nothing complicated about it. So you have to be very creative in how you do it.
It sounds like it for sure. And what's the length of time it takes to organize all of that?
Well, one, maintaining an ongoing maintenance schedule that ensures that the apparatus is in a state of readiness is critical. So making sure that everything's getting in when the tires need to be rotated or changed, oil, all the other stuff, all the regular maintenance, the ladder maintenance that has to take place, the pump maintenance that has to take place, all of those things, you have to stay on schedule. because when they break, and we certainly went through this. You can wait for a long time for parts for a piece of equipment, especially during times like we talked about already, when there's a pandemic and it's difficult to get parts. You break one little thing in the transmission, it's like, okay, well, 3 weeks, 3 months, that piece of equipment is going nowhere. You're down a rig. We actually got to the point when I was in California during fire season where we had deployed so much apparatus that some departments were like, we can't send anymore because I don't have the reserve fleet to put other equipment in service, so we can't go. You need to maintain a reserve fleet for just day-to-day operations at the same time. So it can become quite a logistical challenge to make sure that you're maintaining a constant state of readiness and all the equipment is getting its regular maintenance done. That being said, and I say this talking about myself, firefighters are great at breaking stuff. And so we're always there, there's always a need for something to be repaired for by the shop. The other thing, I should have mentioned this earlier. You and I right now we're talking about our shop and fixing fire engines and fire trucks. They also fix the rescue equipment. They fix the chainsaws. They fix all the generators. They do all of that work. And so the apparatus is just part of what they do. So they're working their keisters off, I would say.
Oh, I bet. And the connections that you have to have in the fire service truly seem endless.
I was pretty young at the time, the very first mutual aid deployment of any significant size that I went to. I got there first day of the fire, and as I was rolling into it, I saw equipment from all over the Bay Area, and I was like, it was mind-blowing. And it was that event, the Lexington fire. Um, it was that event that galvanized in me the responsibility that I had as a fire service professional and as a fire chief, um, to help maintain the system for everybody's benefit, whether you were in Santa Clara County or you were in California or a neighboring state. And I have continued to believe that that is my responsibility, to preserve that system so that whatever community you live in, we're here to help you.
Absolutely. Is there anything else on this topic that you'd like to share with our listeners, or maybe some key takeaways?
I think the one thing that I would say is really a key takeaway is I think that the topic is a good one because we get sort of locked into how we do business or how we have done business. As economic times change and things become more challenging, we need to be more creative. And I think that being willing to think outside the box to ensure that you're maintaining a constant state of readiness, doesn't just apply to replacing fire apparatus. Step back from almost every decision you make and think about it from a more creative perspective, and listen to those around you because I'm quite certain the very first time somebody said, well, why don't we just lease fire engines? I'm sure they were like, nobody leases fire engines. Well, guess what? They do now. So, with all these ideas were crazy at one point, right? But eventually it's like, I don't know why we didn't do this all the time.
Yeah, that happens more times than not, it seems, actually.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Chief, for joining me today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. As always, a link to the article we discussed can be found in the show notes of this episode. If you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.